Hello everybody, today I'm going to start my audiobook thing, and the audiobook today is the $1 Horse. I'm going to do a chapter at a time, so hopefully I'll get the voices right and you'll just tell me what you think. This is one of my favourite books. I know maybe I'm a little bit old for it now, but it's really a wonderful book, and if you're ever feeling down and obviously you like horses, this is a great book to read. It picked me up so many times when I was really down. So, okay. Casey used the twin points of the horse's ears to line up the jump, like a sniper lining up a target on a gun barrel. Even from a distance it looked enormous, Everest in miniature. An artistic flower display attempted to make light of it, but the blossoms and shrubs did little to disguise the reality of the Badminton horse trial's most notorious fence. The Wall of Fear was the nickname given to it by the riders who'd fallen there. If she survived, she'd be well on her way to winning the greatest championship in 3-day eventing. If not, rhythm and balance, Casey told herself. Trust your horse, trust yourself. The fence seemed to grow in size as they approached, towering monster. Come on, boy, you can do it, Casey urged, driving her horse on with her legs and seat. But Patchwork had had enough. Already today he'd been required to cart around a brat who wouldn't stop kicking him, a woman the size of a double-decker bus, and a boy who had refused to share his polo mints, and he had no intention of hurdling this abomination before him. Spying a direct line from the school to his stable where his dinner was waiting, Patchwork veered around the jump, ramming the assembly of junk with his shoulder as he went. The din could be heard 3 streets away. From the direction of the office, Mrs. Ridgely's penetrating voice started to yell and built up to her trademark roar. Who moved my flowers? Where is my good chair? Where? Casey Blue, if you've been raiding my office again so that you can pretend you're riding at badminton, I'm going to murder you. Hope Lane Riding School was known to all who passed through its rusty gates as Hopeless Lane, albeit not within earshot of Mrs. Ridgely. The potholed road that ran alongside it was indeed called Hope, but anywhere further from a place of optimism could scarcely be imagined. Situated between a toxic wasteland and a row of business in various stages of decrepitude, a second-hand electronics shop, a Chinese takeaway, a barber, and a car wash which was, Casey was convinced, a front for stolen vehicle operation. The 12 horses and 3 donkeys, overlooked by the listless trees that guarded the stable yard, represented a last-ditch stand against the city's concrete advance. Barely a kilometre down the road lay the green and lovely contours of Victoria Park, where the young professionals who'd become Hackney's fashionable new residents sipped white flats and at cool cafes, shopped for funky clothes, visited art galleries devoid of paintings, and bought exotic fruit and veg at crowded ethnic street markets. But the money and buzz had not yet filtered to Hopeless Lane Riding School, or for that matter to another of Hackney's hotspots, the infamous Murder Mile, a thoroughfare frequented by gangsters, drug dealers, and a rich array of immigrants, legal and illegal. An invisible wall seemed to separate the two worlds, a sliding door. Sometimes that door would open a chink, and Casey would glimpse of how the other half lived, and entertain ideas of how she might join them. But an instant later it would slam shut again, as impenetrable as a bank vault. Casey was reminded that this is where she belonged, at 414 Red Wing Tower with her father, barely a stone's throw from Murder Mile, at school and with the horses of Hopeless Lane. And yet Hopeless was not how Casey viewed the riding centre. Beneath its shabby exterior and sagging stable roofs, it was a place of hope and sanctuary for many people. For all her bluster, Mrs. Ridgely, no one had ever dared call her by her first name, Penelope, was a good and even inspirational leader to the motley collection of waifs, strays, disadvantaged and broken folk who were bussed in by well-meaning charities. Others wandered, bemused, or simply curious, into her stable yard. More often than not they left uplifted, ready to fight another day. One such person, her woman who'd found the strength to walk away from a life of petty crime after falling in love with riding, had remarked to Casey that Hopeless Lane's owner was the patron saint of lost causes. To her instructors, Gillian, burly but big-hearted, Hermione, who had long tresses and the air of someone who expected to be tapped on the shoulder and informed that a mistake had been made and that she was actually a princess, and Andrew, a drippy boy who was in love with Hermione, Mrs. Ridgely was a mother figure. To Casey and the other volunteers she was part mentor, part tyrant. "Casey Blue!" yelled Mrs. Ridgely. "What are you hiding?" "Can I help you, Mrs. Ridgely?" Casey asked innocently, materializing out of the shadows with a grooming kit. She had persuaded one of the other volunteers to whisk the piebald cob back into the stable while she took advantage of the winter dusk to sneak the flower beds, chair and fold-out camp bed back to the stable owner's office. Mrs. Ridgely glowered at her. A wiry woman with jagged cropped yellow hair and skin like an aging peach, she barely came up to Casey's chest, but what she lacked in stature she made up for in sheer force of personality. "Don't come the innocent with me, girl. I know your tricks. I've told you before that I don't mind if you want to have a trot around the school on patchwork at the end of the day, once the paying clients have gone. It matters not a jot to me if you want to exhaust yourself coaxing over a pole or two. But I will not have you misusing stable property in order to play act these ridiculous fantasies of yours." She followed Casey into Patchwork's stable and watched critically as the girl cleaned his feet with gentle efficiency. At 15 1/2, her youngest volunteer was tall for her age and almost boyishly strong despite her thin frame. But the strain of the past year showed in the pallor of her face against the tangled brown hair. At first glance she was resolutely plain. 1,000 people would pass her on the street without noticing her. It was only on closer inspection that you saw her intelligent grey eyes burned with an intensity that was quite unsettling, and that there was a blue ring around the pupils, almost as if nature had intended them to be the colour of a sunny sky, but a storm had moved in. Beneath those eyes were purple smudges, betraying many nights of lost sleep. Hardly surprising with what she had been through. Goodness knows what her home life was like, with no mother, and that father. Mrs. Ridgely's voice softened. "Casey, you're one of my most talented volunteers we've ever had at Hope Lane, and if you work hard and stay out of trouble, I give you my word I'll try to obtain some sort of grant for you to take your BHSAI exam when you finish school next summer. You have the potential to be a fine riding instructor one day. We could do with you here, but this nonsense about jumping ever more crazy obstacles has to stop, or else—" "Or else what?" Casey asked nervously, straightening up. Mrs. Ridgely pursed her lips. "Oh, never mind. Patchwork needs grooming and I need to lock up. Turn out the lights when you leave." Running a brush over the cob's dusty black and dirt-white hide, Casey reflected on Mrs. Ridgely's offer. She was well aware it was the best she was likely to receive. Trouble was, it wasn't what she wanted. As fond as she was of Patchwork, she knew she could never be content with the future of riding horses like him, stubborn, lethargic, and hard-mouthed. She had no interest in notching up a dizzying number of hours attempting to communicate the finer points of thoroughness and rising on the diagonal to parents and kids who only wanted an hour away from their troubles. She didn't have Mrs. Ridgely's leadership qualities, Gillian's passion for teaching, or Hermione's fondness of being adored by dozens of pony-mad children. Casey dreamed of soaring over heart-stopping fences on a horse of fire, of performing incredible feats to win the greatest prizes in eventing, the Badminton Horse Trials, the Kentucky 3-day event, and the Burghley Horse Trials. Together they made up the most elusive goal of all, the Grand Slam. Of course, to do those things she needed lorry-loads of money, gleaming, specially bred horses, the finest tack, clothes and boots, the best instructors. The list went on. All of which lent weight to Mrs. Ridgely's argument that she should let go of her ridiculous fantasies. She was almost 16, practically a grown-up. If her teachers were to be believed, it was time to be sensible and focus on a realistic, achievable career. Unfortunately, conforming to what was expected of her had never been Casey's strong point. 5 minutes till lock-up, called Gillian over her shoulder as she passed. Night-night, see ya. Casey presented Patchwork with his good-night carrot and gave his granite rump an affectionate pat. Not that you deserve it, she told him. With the teeniest bit of effort you could practically have stepped over that jump. It looked scary, but it wasn't even half a metre. A 4-star horse, a badminton horse, would barely notice something that small. But then, those horses have wings. The piebald chewed without acknowledging her departure. Too long ago to remember, he'd had the spirit snuffed out of him by the learner riders of Hopeless Lane, and he was committed to spending his last years doing the same to them. If a grenade had gone off in his stable, it's doubtful he'd have flicked an ear. It was Friday night. Beyond Hopeless Lane, London's East End seethed and crackled with an energy that was both intoxicating and sinister. Bursts of music, Arabic, Bollywood, African and cheesy pop came at Casey from doorways, along with wisps of illicit smoke and snatches of foreign language. Food smells assaulted her senses. Lebanese, Korean, Chinese, Caribbean, Thai, Greek, McDonald's, and every possible variation of fried chicken. Mouth-watering, Casey jogged to shorten the 15 minutes it usually took to reach Red Wing Tower. The January wind freezing the small part of her face not covered by her sweatshirt hood. On the front steps of the grim grey tower she called home. A group of boys were wrestling and swigging from cans. She waited for them to leave before letting herself in. Red Wing was, as her father liked to say, worse than some local authority housing and not as bad as others. But she generally found that the fewer people she encountered on a party night like Friday, the easier life would be. When she reached the 4th floor and set off along the corridor to number 414, she had the sensation of being watched. The hairs prickled on the back of her neck. I won't look, won't look, won't look, she told herself. Looking was weak. Looking was cowardice. She was putting the key in the lock when the sensation became overwhelming. She swung around. A net curtain twitched, but otherwise the corridor was empty. Nothing and no one was there. Casey sighed. It was nearly 4 months since her father had been released from prison, but the unspecified fear that had been her shadow while he was gone had been slow to loosen its grip. She stood in the darkness until her heart rate returned to normal. Turning the key, she let herself in. Okay, so that's chapter 1. I hope you liked it, and I will hopefully do chapter 2 tomorrow if I've got time. Okay, and I hope you've all had a wonderful Christmas with lots of chocolate and lots of presents and lots of mince pies, and I hope that the new year is going to bring you lots of luck, and bring on 2014. Okay.